higher beard expectation this year than ever?
That's a very good question, and that's how we'll start here on YouTube Live. Look at that, like two professionals, Chase McCabe, and is that Jason Fitz?
Well, I miss your beautiful face, my friend. Like this is
Oh, I
this is
miss
at
you
least
too.
some level of reconnection. Come on now.
I know. I know it's been a while since we've actually seen each other face to face. Now, I will say I'm gonna start this. I'm gonna get a little sappy off the top here because even though Jason Fitz is now big time with ESPN, and does first take your take, and you still hear him on Golic and Wingo from time to time. I will get a random text every now and then from Jason Fitz, just checking in, just seeing how I'm doing. So I always appreciate that. And when I got moved to the midday show, he was one of the first people to reach out, doing the virtual backflip and excitement. So I really appreciate your friendship, and it's good to actually see see your face again as we not just on my TV, but as we actually talk.
Look, I think there's one thing that Nashville really taught me, the music business really taught me to some level, and that's gigs change, but people don't. And one of the craziest things about the music business is that you can spend years of your life on a tour bus with the same group of people, and they're your family, they are your friends, they're the closest of everything. And then all of a sudden you change gigs, or someone on the bus changes gigs, and you can go a decade and not, talk to that person again. And I think that you find out that some connections are real and some connections are worth fighting for. And I think Nashville and tour bus life really taught me that. Like some of my closest touring friends are actually guys that I toured with Phil Vassar on, which was my first road gig that I had where I was actually getting paid by somebody to play music, right? So, it's funny that all these years later, I still look at sports the same way. Like the shows you're on, the number of projects I've been involved with, like that changes all the time. But if you're good to people and you connect with people and you're genuine with people, as people move, all it does is give you more, opportunity to see people succeed. And then through it all, I think it sort of builds a spider web of good feels. And that's what really matters in the world to me.
So, what has this been like for you? We've obviously here at the game, and pretty much everybody that's here. We've had to be very creative over the past 2.5 to 3 months because we're a sports talk radio station and haven't had sports to talk about. Now we've had the Last Dance. Obviously that. Thank you ESPN for moving that up to give us something, and I know you've appreciated that. But NASCAR is back, so that's worked its way in. But what's it been like from a national standpoint to talk sports without sports?
I think it's, the funny thing is local radio and local sort of connection is much tougher than national because, how many teams, how many people in Nashville really care about what, for example, the Browns are going to do. Now, obviously, Nashville is a very transient city. There's a lot of people from a lot of places. But when you start talking about most people in their cars every day, one of the advantages we have when we're doing national is that whatever the biggest story in the entire nation is that day, you can sort of focus on. So, in some ways, I think my job's been easier than yours, but we've had some advantages. The NFL draft certainly gave us a lot to look forward to because we were able to preview 32 teams instead of just focusing specifically on the Titans. And then we came out of that. And, for First Take Your Take, it's primarily my job on that show is to take some of what First Take is passionate about and find a way to bring it to the audience, and have America be passionate in reacting to it. So I give a little of my take, but I really want to get other people worked into the conversation. So we had the advantage on that. We did a quarterback series where we looked at different quarterbacks, and that was easy. And now they're going through primetime players. So every day they take a look at one of the best players in the NBA as a countdown. So we've been doing some of what I think a lot of people in the industry consider summer radio, cheesy lists and countdowns.
Yeah.
We've been doing now with the hope, I think, that in the summer we'll finally get some sports to talk about. And that's really what everybody's waiting for. But I will say this, I think it has forced everybody in our business to be a little bit more creative and to dig a little deeper. And there's no bad in that to me.
No, not at all. I know for me, and I mean, you were around for part of my journey as I was working my way up. I mean, I'm less than a year in of being a full-time host, and then this happens, and it's like, oh, and even though I got two other guys on the show, and I feel like I've had to up my game and change it and, get
Right.
creative, but it's fun. This is where I think I thrive just because I love the outside the box stuff. And that's what we've done a lot of.
Well, and I think that's important right now because the other side of it is I've said this a lot on radio and digital and all the different shows that I've been able to host. we don't matter right now in the grand scheme of things. Like there's bigger things going on than sports, and I understand that. But the one thing that we can offer that I think America needs more than ever, frankly, is some level of escapism. Like whether I was playing music or whether I'm doing sports, ultimately, I feel like my biggest responsibility is to make people forget about what's going on and just have a little fun, maybe get them worked up on a conversation. Isn't that more important than ever right now? I mean, if I can find a cheesy way, and we've had some of the conversations on First Take Your Take where I've said, okay, what happens when sports come back? And I had a caller last week that said, look, I'm living in my truck and I don't really care if sports comes back. And I told him, I said, well,
Right.
I can't do anything about where we are in the world. I'm not a doctor, not a scientist. I don't know how to fix this. And I can't do anything to help people. Unfortunately, I wish I could, that are in their trucks right now, that have lost everything.
Yeah.
So what I can do is try and make sure that while you're in your truck listening to my show for 2 hours, at the very least, you have a laugh and you forget about what's going on. And I think to that extent, what we do right now is more important than ever. And it's more important than ever that we are creative and make people sort of enjoy the process.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. One thing that we did, and Ryan, who's behind the scenes on this right now, came up with this idea. So you remember Game 6 of the 2017 Western Conference Final, and what a crazy night that was. So we did a thing called Game 6 Remastered, where we got with some of the Predators players, some of Sean Henry from the front office, David Poyle, and basically did Zoom calls like this and put together this special of more than just playing the game, just telling stories and kind of weaving our way through that game and that playoff series. So that I can remember that you and Braden Gall went, you were at the game, you go out on Broadway because the party has just, we know that Nashville can throw a party. And there was one that night. How difficult was it to do a show at 6 o'clock in the morning the next day after that celebration?
One of the easiest shows we've ever done because this city was so hyped. And, the funny thing is for me, I got so lucky to be on the Preds flagship station during a run that mattered so much to that team and to the station and to the city. And it was really, it's funny to me. There's a couple memories in my life in Nashville that stand out. And everybody knows I'm a Raiders fan, not a Titans fan. So, I say that, but I was at the Music City Miracle. And the funny thing is, everybody says they were at it. Nobody can prove it. I can, because right after the game, I was walking down Second Avenue, which at the time was closed. And I may have had a little bit to drink. I may have been partying a little bit, right? But we were walking down Second Avenue, me and a couple of buddies, and I wasn't wearing any Titans gear because I was just there as a neutral observer, right?
Sure.
So I'm walking down the street, and a photographer comes up and says, "Hey, can I get each of your names? We just took a picture of you guys." And I said, "Sure." If you go back and get the Tennessean from the day after the Music City Miracle, at the end of the word Tennessean is me going, "Wah," because I was on Second Avenue partying with everybody. I remember that so vividly. And I can honestly say that party in that moment didn't register to the same level of what Game 6 was for everybody. In that moment in Nashville, the entire city came together, and it came together in this weird, I get goosebumps talking about it. It came together in this weird way where it didn't matter what you were a fan of, you're a fan of the city. And the city of Nashville has become so beloved that it's just in a different spot. The love in this city is in a different spot. And so what stood out to me on that night was, and I'll never forget the game, as we were standing around watching, I had somebody, I went out to the concourse level because I had a bunch, or concourse outside. I had a bunch of friends that were outside watching, and I wanted to be around some friends and see what that moment was like. And I remember somebody on one side of me was trying to figure out how line changes work in general. They didn't understand, knew nothing about hockey. And then somebody on the other side of me was absolutely livid about a particular defensive pairing that was on the ice in that moment. And I thought, this is Nashville, where you've got the Preds fan that grew up. And, I went to the first ever Preds game. I got a puck for being one of the first 10,000 in the room.
Yeah.
Like, I remember when there was icing and the Jumbotron said icing. What is icing? Like, they had to teach this city what hockey was. And I had somebody on one side that went through that whole process, learned it and loves it. And somebody else on the other side that didn't know diddly about it, but still was so excited. That to me is what that night was like. Everybody came together, and it's like, it wasn't about the Preds. It wasn't about hockey. It was about Nashville getting this level of love that I've never seen. And the next morning, we spent most of that time just taking calls, asking the cheesiest, like, what's this moment mean to you? Where's this rank? and hearing the excitement in everybody's voices, I'll never forget that day.
Yeah, it was in doing this project. I mean, it made you go back and remember certain things that, I had forgotten, or stories that you didn't know. Like Ryan Johansson was telling about the injury, because he got hurt after game, or in game 4, and ends up missing the rest of the playoffs. And he's talking about the guys, like his teammates, are having to help him put his underwear on because he can't move. Like that's when he realized just how bad it was.
Mm.
And he and Mike Fisher rode to the hospital in the ambulance together because Fish had gotten hurt in that game. But it's like stuff like that. But then the fan experience that you brought up would just it makes you get excited to know the NHL's announcement today that, hey, they do have intentions on coming back, having a 2014 playoff, and the Predators would be a part of that. But it just, thinking about those moments makes you miss it even more, but also gets you excited for when it's going to be back.
Yeah, and I think you talk about when a city comes together. One of the glorious things about the Stanley Cup playoff in general is that because of the length of it and because the feel of anybody's capability to get to the final, that it just feels like the city becomes more enamored with it. Whatever city it's in. I mean, St. Louis just went through the same thing, obviously, with the Blues, and Trey Wingo, for anyone that doesn't know, worked in St. Louis, so he was I say air quotes, Blues fan. Not throwing any shade. I'm just saying Trey never talks a lot of Blues until it's the Stanley Cup final. But what was funny about that run on Golic and Wingo is just seeing how it resonated with Trey, because it wasn't one game, one Sunday, and then you wait till next Sunday. It was a series of games and ups and downs and the oh my gods, could we possibly get this done? It's a longer story, so it's drawn out. It's like barbecue, slow and low, right? Like that's what you got to do throughout the course of the Stanley Cup playoff. And that particular run, I just don't know. That run was done without expectation, and I don't know
Sure.
that Nashville will ever be able to recapture that portion of it, because they'll have great runs, and this Preds team is going to be obviously underperformed at times this year, but this Preds team is set up and supposed to be very good for a long time. So when you look across the board, I expect them to be competitive, but the first run done unexpectedly in that way, I don't know that you ever recapture that in any other sport.
Chase McCabe, Jason Fitz here with you on game night. Jason Fitz, of course, of ESPN, but spent some time with us here at ESPN 102.5 The Game. So the return to play format was put out there by Gary Bettman today. He completely lost me on the draft lottery, so we won't even get into that. But basically, the idea is the regular season is done. They're not going to try and pick that back up, but 24 teams will make the tournament, so they say, and they're going to have 2 hubs, an Eastern hub, a Western hub with 12 teams each, and the Predators get in that, and they'll be part of the qualifying round, which will see them face the Arizona Coyotes, and then you have the top 4 seeds of each conference that'll do a round robin thing to help them determine the seeds for those. So they'll have the bye of the main tournament, but still play. So you hear that. You've heard rumors of what baseball could do as they still grovel about money. You have the NBA, that what they could possibly do. So do you feel like that it's there? We can't quite touch it yet, but we're very, very close to having sports back in our lives?
Yeah, I do. I think there's been a palpable change, just because I wanted to use the word palpable tonight.
That's good.
Thank you very much. I feel better about myself. There's been a change in tone in the last couple of weeks, and a week and a half ago, I was sitting around saying, "Heck no, I just don't feel like we're closer." And especially with college football that I cover so much for ESPN, we get asked a lot about it, and I kept saying, "I just can't find a way that this makes sense." There's something has changed in the tone of municipalities, not just in the tone of sports. So when you have, New York and now New Jersey today adds up. They're going to let people start getting into facilities. They're letting people start train. As you see these gates open up, I don't know if they should. I'm not smart enough to know that. Will they? I think so. And I think one of the keys you mentioned when you talk about all those proposals with the NBA, I had the opportunity today to talk to one of our NBA writers on First Take Your Take, Tim Bontemps. And what Tim pointed out so smart is that the NBA Players Association has been part of every step of the owner's plan. So when the board of governors for the NBA on Friday announces their plan, they're going to do so already essentially with the backing of the NBA Players Association. Like they're going to essentially make a joint statement. And what's powerful about that is they're going to have a joint statement with a plan, but they're also they've managed to do all of this and never have a single public conversation about money. And that to me is the big win. You mentioned Major League Baseball. No matter what happens now, the conspiracy theorist is going to think that it was about greed on either side, which is a terrible look. And so what you have, and that's why I think the NHL's announcement was important today too, because the NBA was the first to shut down. And had an announcement not been made, they would have been the first to come back with a plan. That's a level of sort of love that you grow. And for hockey, I think for the NHL particularly, they need to take a little bit of a card from UFC and take a little bit of a highlight from NASCAR. You know, if you talk to Ryan McGee for ESPN, it covers NASCAR. I asked him, why was NASCAR pressing so hard to come back? And he said, because we understand the power of eyeballs. And that's what this is
Yep.
about. I mean, if the NHL can get their system together before the NBA, the power of eyeballs is going to be epic for the sport, because we all know the Stanley Cup playoff is already incredible. So I think, yeah, we're closer than ever because sports are looking across at each other and saying, look, this is going to happen one way or the other. It's like we went from we can't to how can we? And that's a big difference.
Sure. Yeah, and I agree. And I love NASCAR and do a NASCAR show, and have been very connected with those in the sport. And they'll be the first to admit it. Like, yeah, this isn't the '90s anymore. People don't like our sport like they used to. So this is a great opportunity to get either old fans back that got mad for whatever reason, or they lost a lot of people when Dale Earnhardt passed away, and trying to get some of those people back, or get new people that haven't watched. They have a section on their website, NASCAR.com. So, are you new to NASCAR? Have you watched a race before? And it's like you were talking about with hockey, explaining all the rules and doing like the NASCAR 101 stuff. I think that's great. And hockey has a chance to do it. It's really sad with baseball. I did one of these with Tom Glavine a few weeks ago, and he said, look, the players have the right to ask the questions. And I understand their concerns with the 50-50 split or a salary cap, but there's a better time to have those conversations. I mean, they can't, he remembers 1994. You don't want a situation like that. So there are all these sub storylines to the big storyline of just getting back, and also, learning to deal with what's going on in our world with COVID-19.
Well, and the hardest part about the baseball conversation is I don't know who keeps leaking it about money, but once it happened once, now it feels like both sides are only leaking information about the other side regarding money. And let's be real, how many people right now have no job? And how many people, like I mentioned earlier, are living in their truck and they have no idea how they're going to feed their family? And whether it's right or wrong, I believe that players are people. So they have every right to ask the same questions any other person would ask. If those questions were about health and safety, I don't think anybody's faulting them. If those questions become about money, then there's the perception, right or wrong, like there's the perception point that this is a fight between millionaires and billionaires about finances. And that's just, you're not going to win that. In fact, I think if you're Major League Baseball, you'll lose fans for generations if during the worst time that we've had since the Great Depression, people are actually not getting back on the field to play in any sport because of cash. Like that, the fans won't forget that.
You brought up college football and the work that you do with college football and your network, and just how involved in that sport that ESPN is. That's a different conversation because you're dealing with student athletes at this point. You're not dealing with professionals, and there's so many other conversations involved with, whether the player should, get more benefits and be paid and all that. That's separate, but it also keeps coming up, as we have this conversation. So where do you stand on college football, on whether you think, all right, it's going to play the normal time like we always see it, or should it play?
So should it and will it, I think, are two different questions right now. And it's funny, if we'd have done this exact conversation last week, right now, 1 week ago in this moment, I would have said no way. And because student athletes can't be held to a different standard than regular students are. Ultimately, a job of a university, they have two jobs. One is to educate, and the second is to do it safely. So every kid that goes to a college has the right to be safe while they're there. To put a kid at risk just because he's an athlete is absolutely, it's offensive to me. It's insulting to the athletes and what they do. I hate every ounce of it. Then I saw the numbers. And there are moments in life where you're just shook. And I remember last week reading the article on ESPN.com 3 or 4 times because I just couldn't make the numbers make sense. The economic loss, according to the study done, would be $4 billion total. But more important, it's an average of about 60, I think it was $62 million per Power 5 school would be lost if there's no football. And when you look across the board at that, also over half of the schools that they looked at in all of college sports don't have the resources to withstand that sort of loss. So now you have to ask yourself, all right, who's going to help? You only if there's no college football for anybody that thinks that that's viable, then there one of two things happens. College football goes away, which is, and I don't mean for a year, I mean college football dies on the vine,
Right.
or the federal government likely has to step in and write massive checks to save college football. That I can't see America being okay with that either. So now I start looking around and I'm thinking, my God, I mean, the finances are so just absolutely overwhelming on it. I'm not sure, even though I don't see how it could possibly be right for the students if students aren't back on campus. I don't know what college football does if they can't play college. Like, I don't know what that does to all of college sports. I mean, college football, as we all know, funds most sports other than basketball for every major
Sure.
school. So you're talking about the elimination of everything. Like, let's just let college sports die. That sounds melodramatic. I think that that's a real possible consequence for a large number of schools. So I think what we're going to end up with this fall is a group of schools that are very comfortable playing, and they're going to go out there and they're going to find a way, no matter what, to get kids in there. We may not get every school participating in it, but I'm under the thought in my mind that as many schools that can will, and then the schools together will band together to help the others so that they can try and find a way to mitigate the losses. That's the only solution I can come up with in my head.
Yeah, I mean, and that's you bring up the other thing of, okay, if it's not safe on campus, because we've talked to Rick Stockstill, MTSU's football coach, a couple months ago now, I guess it was, and he said that he goes, if it's not safe to be in class, why is it safe to have my guys on a football field practicing, not even playing a game, but practicing and laying on top of each other? And it's a fair question. I mean, it's a very fair
He's
question.
right.
Now, he's totally right. But now, we're learning, and we learn something new every day with this thing. And as things start to reopen, places start to reopen, that, now there's a little bit of, okay, we're learning to live with it. We know it's not going away. And I'm not saying that putting football teams back on a field is the right way to do it, but we're just learning more and more. So when you bring up, let's say that some universities open their campuses for class, which some have already said they're going to do that this fall. And you go into the question of, all right, should fans be allowed in the stands? Well, if you're letting kids on campus, shouldn't you let them into the football game? Don't they kind of go hand in hand?
Yeah, I mean, that's why should and could are very different, because you're right. I mean, there is not a single reason in the world to put a kid at risk just because he plays football. And the thought that people are saying, well, we're going to play for smaller crowds. I mean, if it's not safe for me and you to sit closer than 6 feet together, last time I checked, the offensive line is closer than 6 feet. So how's it safe for them? And for anyone that
And
says,
you're a
well,
hugger, so there's no way that happens.
I don't stand a chance. I mean, first time, my God, I don't know what I'm going to do the first time I'm with people and the Raiders score a touchdown. Like, am I just going to, I'm going to have to sit with my hands in my pockets. But, the fair point. But then the other side of it is, when you look at it from the athlete standpoint, they're going to be put at this massive risk. And even for people that say, well, they'll test them. Okay. We also know that this can be asymptomatic. And we also know that you can register a false negative. So there really isn't an answer. So what the real question becomes, and this is not my question, I will stress that. The real question becomes, if you're talking about kids getting COVID-19, which is, I think, part of what you'd be talking about, the risk of COVID-19 versus the risk of losing the business altogether. I don't know that some schools don't think it's worth the risk. And, when we
Sure.
talk about schools opening back up, let's acknowledge there are normal non-football based institutions that have been cutting programs like history and English and literature. Like, they're cutting majors because no kids on campus means no money for the school and tuition, no money in the school for tuition. School's not going to exist. So I think colleges are under a weird pressure to find a way to put kids on campus, even if it's not safe for all the kids on campus, because otherwise, how long can they keep their doors open? And that's the weird business part of education that I don't think we really want to talk about.
Yeah, and the scary part about this too, Fitzy, is it's not, and I hate saying it, but it's not if somebody tests positive or gets it. It's more like when, because
Mhm.
that, I think that once, and that goes for pro sports or collegiate sports, anything that, they all have this plan. Okay, what happens if one player or two players test positive? We already saw with the UFC, the first weekend they were back, a fighter tested positive. I mean, it's probably going to happen. So now it's how you deal with it.
But the next week, another fight, right? Like, and that's
Right.
I think the biggest difference for the college aspect of it is they're kids. They don't like, we've been talking about how the NBA, the NHL, and Major League Baseball players choose to attack this entire issue. Well, they're unionized, and there isn't that power for these college kids. And I think it's just it blows my mind when you've got Jim Harbaugh coming out and say, "Hey, I've talked to my guys; they want to play." What do you think they're going to tell their coach? Yeah, coach, I'm not really
Right.
comfortable with it. Like, you think a kid looking at the person that controls their playing time and their future is going to say, have the courage to stand up and say, you know what, coach, I'm just, my mom and dad struggle with asthma and I'm not comfortable with that. Like, that's never going to happen. So of course, the guy that makes $7.5 million per year, happy to go out there and coach a game, I'm sure. But the kids that report to him, I don't know who can even be their voice. But unfortunately, this is one of those things where I think it's terrible in so many ways, but I don't think we can do anything to stop it.
Yeah, I don't think so either, and that's the scary part, but that's what it's built to. That's what it has become. So something that we definitely need to see. So let's actually talk some sports and not whether they're going to be back. I
Yes.
know one thing that people always say, and you remember this from doing local radio, and now you probably hear it from doing national. Of how come the national people never talk about the Titans? They never want to bring it. They never want to give the Titans credit, and they have, because the Titans hadn't earned it for a long time. And they do last year. They get to the AFC title game, have a fun season. That was a lot of fun to be a part of here. But you look at what they did with the draft, what they did free agency, and one of the conversations we've been having on our air is, can you really say that they're better? Because I think right now I just kind of do that because I don't really know. How do you view the Titans right now?
So let me address a couple of things, because I get asked a lot from people on Twitter, especially coming from Nashville, why we don't talk more Titans on ESPN. And I
Sure,
want to give everybody an honest answer. Like, this is a real moment. Like, let's have some real talk, just me and
let's
you
do it.
talking about it. Like, everything that's talked about at ESPN or Fox, doesn't matter. Everything that the NFL network, it's studied, it's metered, it's checked out. Basically, we know what the world will react to. One of my least favorite topics in the world right now is Dak Prescott's contract, because Dak's going to sign a mega deal and I don't care. Like, to me, this is simple. But if I, on First Take Your Take, say, what do you think? Should Dak get paid? I can put my feet up and sit back, because we are going to get hundreds of calls. If I go into that same show and I say, all right, guys, what do you think? Are the Titans, is Derrick Henry worth paying a ton of money to? Chirps. Like, at the end of the day, part of the reason we talk about certain teams is that they just generate more interest. And unfortunately for the Titans, the one thing that they haven't really been able to have since the Eddie George, Steve McNair, like, think about those teams. Those teams were stacked with stars. Like, you have to be stacked with stars for people to really buy in when you're not a certain logo in the NFL. And it's not like we're ignoring the Titans because they'd be, if ESPN figured out that us talking about the Titans would make the ratings double, we talk about the Titans more, right?
Sure.
So that being said, I spent a lot of time last year when I was on Go Look and Wingo every morning. I was the Titans champion going into the back half of the year, because it was pretty easy to see why they were going to win a bunch of games. They had good matchups that favored them. The Titans still are built, to me, to be the best team in the division. Like, when you talk about what the Titans do particularly well, they run the football well, and the metrics, and this is something Orlovsky's gone off on. If you sit down and have a 10-minute conversation with Orlovsky about Tannehill, he'll tell you about Tannehill's precision out of play action, particularly, right? So you're talking about an offense that's actually built to the strength of Ryan Tannehill and what he does as a passer. I think what Ryan Tannehill did last year is replicatable. And when you look at those elements of it, you look at that offensive line, which is capable of playing at a very high level. Yes, they've got to work in a new tackle. We all know that. I liked the pick in the first round. The biggest thing that Mike Golick Jr. pointed out when we were doing our draft broadcast is that Isaiah Wilson's going to need a little help, right? But the Titans as a team have always figured out how to get their tackles a little help while they get their feet wet. So I'm not worried about that. Derrick Henry is an absolute stud that's going to be able to put up massive numbers. Tannehill is efficient, and they do have explosive weapons. And that defense is darn good. So now you look at the rest of the division. Well, I would argue that the Texans got worse. All right. And also I'd argue that Bill O'Brien must have naked pictures of somebody, because he's a terrible GM and manages to keep his job. I don't know how he does it. The Jags are going to be trash, and I think the Jags are intentionally going to try and tank for Trevor Lawrence. So
Yeah.
take the Jags out of the conversation. That leaves you the Colts. Now, the Colts have a spectacular offensive line, and I love Jonathan Taylor out of Wisconsin. So I think they got a home run with that, a home run with that pick. But I'm telling you, I watched more Phillip Rivers last year than most people. I don't think Phillip Rivers has anything left in his arm. He is a shell of who he was 4 years ago. So to me, we keep looking at Phillip Rivers and saying, yeah, but look at the gunslinging. Look at what he can do. I think Phillip Rivers is not an upgrade for them at quarterback. And frankly, I think they would have been better off looking at Jameis Winston or Andy Dalton than they'll get out of Phillip Rivers. So I think the Colts take a step back because I don't believe in their quarterback play. So are the Titans demonstrably better? I don't know. They're probably about the same team. Like the Titans are built to be maddeningly 9-7, maybe 10-6 if something goes right, right? But I think that's enough to win this division this year. Even though I think it's a very good division on the whole, other than the Jags. I think there's the other three teams are all good. They're very equal. But if you look at talent, I think when you look at the talent across the board, puts the Titans a little bit ahead. And I think their coaching is better than people give it credit for.
Yeah, and that's the thing that stands out to me is Vrabel. And has he been perfect? No. I mean, there were times we would start a show after a win, still going, "What the heck was Vrabel doing?" I mean, you can, I mean, Jared Stillman. You can imagine how he was reacting to some of that. And he was going into it. He was in his second year, so I mean, you expect him to learn from those mistakes. But I think you also see where he came from, coaches he played for, not just Belichick, but Bill Cowher. There's some of that in there. I mean, Bill O'Brien, the coach, you see some of that. So he has learned, Urban Meyer, he has learned some things, and it shows, and the players really relate to him. So I think that he's Mike Vrabel is a pretty good coach, and we're seeing that now, and we're going to see even more going into year 3.
I think Mike Vrabel is better than pretty good. I think he's an excellent coach. And to answer the other portion that we talked about earlier, what'll make people talk about the Titans more? Mike Vrabel is part of the answer to that. He's a great personality. He's a great interview. We all know, we've heard about the podcast stuff last year that blew up, but Mike Vrabel has that personality. I think Vrabel is a key to making the Titans a bigger conversation piece. And I can tell you, people in Bristol root for Mike Vrabel. Like ESPN is rooting for the human being that is Mike Vrabel. And that stuff, I think there's more eyes on the Titans because of Mike Vrabel than there would be for many other coaches. And you mentioned some of his coaching tree. Part of what I think makes Vrabel, in that sense, really lovable, not just to us, but to the guys that play for him, is Vrabel will bet on his talent time and time again. I think he's going to be a maddening coach for some fans because he's going to bet on whatever talented player he thinks gives him the best chance on that play. And that doesn't always, that not every coach is that way. There are certain coaches that believe in their system above everything. I believe that Vrabel is an empowerment coach, much like Bill Cowher was. You mentioned Urban Meyer the same way. Urban Meyer would blow everything up and go with a hot hand if he needed to. Vrabel reminds me of that. So even when things may not make sense to us from a play calling standpoint, I think Vrabel's looking at it saying, hey, I got a guy that I believe in, and I'm going to believe in a guy to make plays.
When you were talking about Phillip Rivers, you brought up Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton. Cam Newton is still a free agent, which blows my mind that he's still available. How shocked were you, though, that Winston, to me, made the very grown-up decision to say, you know what, I'm not going to sit around and chase a starting job that may or may not be there. I'm going to go to a place where I know I'm going to be the backup. I'm not going to compete for the starting job this year, but I'm going to go learn from Drew Brees. To me, that's maturity from a guy that, quite frankly, I didn't know if he had it in him. And I think that could be beneficial to him moving forward.
I totally agree. And look, if I told you today that your favorite team's starting quarterback could throw for 5,000 yards and 30 touchdowns, would you take it? You'd take it all day, every day. If I told you he was going to throw for 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, and only 20 picks, 30 touchdowns, 20 picks, you still taking it?
How many games am I winning?
Okay, I mean, that's part of it. But I think we've gotten so obsessed with the 30 interception conversation that we forget the 30 touchdowns and 5,000 yards. I mean, that is not a small amount of production from a quarterback. He makes bad decisions sometimes. I think he put himself in a quarterback room where it's not even about coaching. I mean, I think we can take Sean Payton and throw Sean Payton out the door as part of this conversation because he's had some very good coaching. What he gets the advantage of in this. Right. I mean, Bruce Arians is the quarterback whisperer, right? So I think what he gets out of this is the opportunity to watch and process from Drew Brees. And that's a much different approach. He gets the opportunity to watch and process for somebody that I think processes the field faster than almost everybody in the NFL, makes decisions quicker without predetermining. And one thing, Jordan Rodgers and I worked together a lot when I first started with ESPN. And one thing I learned from Jordan that I don't think a lot of people realize is sometimes when a quarterback comes up to the line of scrimmage, before he's even broken the huddle, his coach has told him to eliminate an entire section of the field. So don't even look at that side of the field. You're only acknowledging this portion of the field. These are the only matchups you're going to look at. I don't think people realize that, because there's times they'll say, well, this guy was wide open. Well, what's that matter if the quarterback was told his reads were predetermined in this quadrant? So the thing you have to look at with Drew Brees is a lot of guys come up to the line of scrimmage. They've already narrowed based on the first formation. They've already narrowed their reads down to two guys, maybe three, and they're over here. So in that process, they make the determination where they're going to go. Derek Carr, my beloved Raiders, I think is one of his biggest faults is that by the time he comes to the line of scrimmage, he already knows who he's throwing the ball to. There's one or two guys or it's going away. It's the way he plays. Drew Brees comes up to the line of scrimmage, reads the whole field, takes the ball, and then reads again so quickly. He processes so quickly. That's the skill I think Jameis could learn from this. And if he could learn quick processing and get the ball out of his hand faster on some of those quick throws, Jameis becomes a better and different quarterback. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised at all, no matter what smoke everybody keeps blowing about Taysom Hill. I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Jameis be the starter for the Saints for the foreseeable future when Drew Brees goes away, and have a lot of success doing it.
Yeah, I could totally see that too. Now you bring up your Raiders, so potential hot take coming here, because the quarterback that I said it just is not working here. It's time to move on, and they did. Marcus Mariota is now with the Las Vegas Raiders as the backup, or as it appears. I think he's the starter before the season's over. I think he takes Derek Carr's job. And the reason I say that isn't necessarily based on his ability. I do think there is something to be said, because we saw it firsthand here in Nashville, of a change of scenery can do a guy good. But I also look at John Gruden has been obsessed with Marcus Mariota since he came out of Oregon. I think he loves the kid. So I think he's going to do everything in his power to make him succeed. And I get the vibe, and you're the Raiders fan, and you obviously keep up with them more than I do, but I also get the vibe that there's something missing between Gruden and Derek Carr. And I could see Derek Carr being on the other side of that coin of he will go get a fresh start somewhere else before this is all said and done. But I do believe Mariota is going to go in there and at some point in the season be the starter for that team.
I'm torn on this one, because I can see it. I believe in Marcus. I think that Marcus, if healthy, has a real opportunity. And now that he's a backup, he will have a real opportunity to get healthy. There is a disconnect between Gruden and Carr, and part of that is competitiveness. Gruden wants, a quarterback that'll make smart but aggressive decisions. But the other side of it is, I just mentioned, some of the reads are predetermined. One of the keys in John Gruden's offense, people constantly rip on Carr for checkdowns, and Carr even admitted in an interview in The Athletic last month that there are times he walks up to the line of scrimmage and he's already been told, throw the ball to the check down immediately, because what they're trying to do is sucker the defensive backs up. So part of Gruden's chess plan is, I'm going to run the play this way for the first 10 times. And then the 11th time, I'm going to run something different. You're going to be lulled to sleep. That's how we're going to make it work. So I think that's part of it. Look, Derek Carr had a really good year last year. I don't think he had a good year. I think he had a really good year. And if you go back and watch in week 16 and 17 in the season, he was throwing to mostly guys that won't even be in the NFL this year. That's a statement to me. I don't think people understand how terrible the weapons were for the Raiders, and that's why they were so aggressive. I mean, they drafted multiple wide receivers for a reason. They drafted 3 guys in the first round to be help on the offensive side of the ball because they had nothing. So to me, Marcus, I think, still has starting capability left. If they didn't believe in Carr, they could have moved up in the draft. Last year, the year before, they haven't done that. I think that we've sort of overblown the problems. Carr's a value quarterback. To me, unless Carr comes out and absolutely takes a step back, I think that Marcus sits on the bench. But if Marcus gets the opportunity, look, I still think Marcus can be a high-level starter in this league. We've seen him play incredibly well, and we've seen him play aggressive, which Gruden likes, but we've also seen him play smart in the red zone, which Gruden likes. So these are all high qualities for quarterbacks. The nerve damage and things like that we barely ever talk about with Marcus, like the injuries just piled up at some point. So if he's healthy, I think he can play. And it was a smart move by the Raiders. They have the nicest quarterback room in the league. I think Marcus and Derek, they're just going to be saying, I love you, man, to everybody. But Marcus can play. So if he ends up being the starter for the Raiders, I'll go out and be as happy about that as I possibly could be.
So have you gotten used to the fact that they are officially the Las Vegas Raiders now?
No, I don't know that I'll ever get used to it, but I love it. I will tell you this, and this is an important note for Nashville, because stadiums are a part of everybody's conversation. For anyone that
Sure.
doesn't know, the Raiders got a new stadium. It was $2 billion to build it. It was paid for by a hotel tax that was put on Las Vegas hotel rooms. So bonds from the city paid for it. So Mark Davis inherited the team from his dad, managed to get a free $2 billion stadium, and moved his team to Vegas. Now I put in my season ticket request right away. I put in $100 deposit. I'm going to buy 2 season tickets. I'll sell the games I can't go to. I had a perfect plan. It took them almost 2 years to get to me on the season ticket list because there was such a waiting list. And they started with people that were local and then they branched out. By the time they got to me, the only seats that were left, the average PSL cost for me was going to be $16,000 per seat. So it was
Holy
$32,000 just
moly.
to buy the personal seat license. I told them I needed some time to think about it. And they called me a couple of days later and said, sorry, you're out of time. We're sold out. Every single seat in that stadium was
Wow.
sold out. They made over $550 million in PSL seats alone, just in the PSLs. So I tell you that not because it's an impressive thing about Vegas. I tell you that because Nashville and Vegas are very similar. Both teams, I think, are going to struggle for life with a home field advantage because it's a city that people love to go party in. So if you're a Browns
Right.
fan and you're sitting there with your wife and you're like, all right, honey, you want to go to Minnesota this year or Nashville? That's why the stadium's constantly filled with other fans, right? The same thing's going to happen in Vegas. If you could go see your favorite team, if you're a Titans fan and you're looking at it and saying, well, babe, you want to go see the Jacksonville game, or we could go to Vegas for the weekend and catch them play the Raiders. Like that's a no-brainer. So there's going to be a lot of non-local fans that go to these games, but it's an important conversation for Nashville also because we all know that at some point the stadium conversation is going to come up and it's going to be real. And what you have here is a team in the NFL that's just got a free $2 billion stadium that's sold out quickly. And at this point, let me ask you how many people watching even care that the city of Oakland doesn't have a team anymore. So the city of Nashville needs to be prepared coming out of all of this with what their stance is going to be. You got to be comfortable knowing that if the team comes in and says, we want a free stadium, whether it's Portland, Oregon, San Antonio, Texas, there were teams lining up bidding for the opportunity to give the Raiders a free stadium. They will want the Titans at whatever the cost may be. So the city needs to start preparing for whatever the solution is to get a stadium built that will be a stadium that can last for a very long time, that likely is going to have to be a partnership in funding.
Yeah, and can host all these big events other than the Titans, so other than just football games.
Oh my God! Like
They
the ESPN guys, we walked away from the draft. Everybody's saying, "Oh my God, if this city had a different stadium, they'd be a constant Super Bowl city." That was
Yeah,
the real
yeah,
conversation from everybody around the NFL. If they had a different stadium, there'd be Super Bowls there all the time, and that's real.
and that's always I'm a wrestling guy, WrestleMania. I mean, WrestleMania would be Vince McMahon would be like, "Hey, here I am, let me in, let's do it." But it's
Final
always
four in the
stadiums.
NCAA. I mean,
Final four.
and then college football national championship games. I mean, you don't want to have the playoff series and the national championship game down somewhere here where you can. I mean, I went to the game in Atlanta. We covered the game in Atlanta. We covered the game in Santa Clara. Like none of those touch like the new Raiders Stadium is gorgeous, and it's going to be the home of Super Bowls and college football national championships. If Nashville had that sort of a facility, they would also.
I mean, could get Garth Brooks too. I mean, he likes to do those big stadiums.
He can. When you're Garth Brooks, you can do them big stadiums. That's what I'm saying. Like, just let me sit in one time, Garth. That's all I ask.
And you could do that, and that's a great segue because to wrap this up, you are one of those guys that I'm not envious of you. I'm proud of you because you've lived two dreams. You had the music dream first, and then now the sports talk dream that you've done. But you still have a lot of friends in the music industry here in Nashville, and I asked you before we came on if you were still playing at all or doing some session work, and I know you're pretty much focused on ESPN now, but you look at this time and this is tough for the music industry because you can't go out and work. You can sit in a studio, you can sit at home. I think they've done a great job with the Zoom and the Facebook Lives and the virtual concerts that they've been doing for their fans. But this is tough for people like you that you were the fiddle player for a long time. That right now there's just nothing to do. There's no work.
Yeah, and I think the hardest part about that is for years as a fiddle player, I was on what they call show pay, and that's what most of this city's on as a musician, and that means you only get paid when you play shows. And so part of what you do is you start looking at your calendar early on, and you say, okay, well, we have 12 shows in January, so I'm going to do okay that month. And but we only have 3 shows on, and I'm telling you, like people don't understand how bad sometimes the economics are for guys like that. And I know a lot of this audience does more than others, but when I was still in the business a couple of years ago, there were people that had number one hits that were paying $250 a show. So if you start thinking about it, you did 100 shows that year, you made 25K to play for somebody that's had number ones. And so now you talk about people that have just been, they've been doing okay, they've been keeping their lights on, they've been stable, and now they've lost everything. I mean, that's the hardest part about this. Like, obviously, my heart breaks for new artists that are breaking their careers and trying to come out and really establish themselves. But mostly right now, my heart breaks for so many of my friends that, I have that have been musicians on huge gigs for the last several years that now suddenly in a year they thought they were going to do okay, might have absolutely no income coming in. And it's not like computer programming. You can't just go apply for somebody else. There's only so many fiddle jobs in Nashville. And if none of them are working, you've got nothing. So
Right.
this is a catastrophic time for, we mentioned Nashville, or we mentioned Vegas earlier. Like, I think Vegas and Nashville are the two cities that will be hurt the most through all of this pandemic, and it's going to take the most help to try and raise back up. And I don't know what that looks like, because not only are we seeing every artist cancel tours for this year, and that we've become used to that at this point, but even going into next year, what's it going to look like? How are they going to tour? Can artists help their band people keep their lights on? This is the toughest time I've ever seen for this city, and I just, my heart breaks. Like, better to be lucky than good for me that I'm no longer in the music business, because man, I don't know what we would be doing if I was.
Well, it's kind of ironic because the last show that I went to before all this started was the All for the Hall event that Keith Urban's so involved in, and Vince Gill, and it was the first time that I'd been to it. It was such a fun night, and I was thinking back because somebody said, "Okay, what was the last concert you went to before COVID?" And I thought about it, and I was like, "Well, it was that." I see so many of those things in the near future, because the one thing that I love about this town, but the music industry especially, is you're gonna have, we make jokes about Garth, that Garth can do it. Garth is gonna reach over and pull the little guy up and help him, and you're going to see that even though the industry is taking a hit and the city's taking a hit, that's the fun part of watching everybody pull together and try and bring everybody out of it, because it's, whether you're the biggest star going or the up and comer, they're all in this together. And I think that's what's so neat.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And the music business has done some of that. Like, the Grammy Foundation has done a nice job of raising money for touring musicians that no longer have an income. And, my hope is that America gets back to feeling safe being in environments where entertainment happens, because so much of our bread and butter in the country music industry for years was built on fairs and festivals and amphitheaters and all of these things that rely on people, feeling comfortable being out. And, while I totally, number one priority is safety for everybody involved, there is also an element of gotta feed families. And I know that the hall will get involved in. I know the CMAs will get involved in it. The Country Music Association does a great job trying to help everybody in these situations. But it's going to be really interesting to see what country music looks like, and I think it's going to take not months but years for everybody to really get back to where we were as a touring city. Unfortunately, because of what we're going through.
Well, and I will say this too, Fitzy, is a hobby of mine has been playing guitar. I've been playing since I was a freshman in high school. And one thing that's been fun about this is I've had a lot of time. So I'm sitting where I do the show from, and right behind me, I've had my guitar. So it's like during a break, or even on the show some, I reach over and I just start playing. And I think that you'll see many people like that have taken music as a hobby, because I don't play professionally like you did, but music is very important to me, as I know it was to, or still is to you. And I think people are finding some comfort in music, whether it's listening to their favorite artists or playing an instrument during this time. And so that's the positivity that I take from this.
Oh, heck yeah. And the at-home concerts have been really incredible to see artists in their houses and just sort of being themselves. And yeah, I had the opportunity to be part of the on the social side, the Disney sing along. Like, we did a little bit of Disney from ESPN. So I sat down at the piano and played and sang Circle of Life a little bit. And like, I think that
Nice.
sort of stuff is going to be bigger and bigger over the course of this year, particularly because it's also a great way. Jordan Davis, a relatively new country artist, is a good friend of mine. And we talked the other day on ESPN, and he mentioned, he's just looking for digital ways to get his guys shows so that everybody can make a little money and keep afloat. Like that's one thing I know this city will do. Like I said when I covered the draft for ESPN, the thing about Nashville is that Nashville, after the flood, it was Nashville that saved Nashville. And this is a
Sure.
city that knows how to come together, pull our bootstraps up. We don't need everybody else to give us a pity party. We figure it out. And that's part of what makes this city so dang special to me and to you and to everybody watching it. And that's part of what's going to make Nashville great. It's going to take a little bit rebuilding, but there is no doubt in my mind that Nashville can survive anything because Nashville believes in helping each other.
Well, Fitzy, it has been so much fun to catch up with you and to see your lovely face. I see you on TV, but just this one-on-one with everybody watching has been a lot of fun. And I miss you, but very proud of you and everything that you're doing with ESPN. And it's very fun for me to look at my friends and go, I know that guy. I got his number.
Well,
So
look,
it's
I can't
awesome to catch up.
I can't wait till we're on Lower Broadway having a long hug during a Preds incredible Stanley Cup run. So let's just hope that the world gets figured out in time to make that happen this year.
Yeah, I hope it does too. So we will all chat soon. Jason Fitz of ESPN. First Take, your take on ESPN Radio, and you can check that out. We play that, of course, on ESPN 94.9, our sister station, so you can hear that. Fitzy, take care. Good to see you.
Have a great day. Appreciate you, my friend.